Hello and welcome to The Final Frontiersman, a YouTube channel about all things Trek with a heavy focus on Star Trek Adventures role-playing game. I'm Bill, and today we have a little bit of a special episode. I am joined by two wonderful guests returning to the channel. First we have David and Chris. So David and Chris, welcome back to Final Frontiersman. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to
Thanks
be
for
here.
having us, Bill.
Yeah, do you want to remind the audience, if they haven't seen you before, or if they have, it's been a while, who exactly are you?
Go ahead, David.
Okay, well, I'm David, and I play Lieutenant Junior Frank Drake in our Star Trek Adventures games. Been here from the beginning. I'm the British voice opening introduction person by default. So apologies for those, and going forward.
And you do a wonderful job. Thank you very much, David. Chris?
Yeah, so I play Commander Lok in our game, and yeah, I think I've been on the show once before with you, Bill.
Yeah, I believe so. I think David maybe twice, Chris once. So, yeah, welcome back again. Today we are having a special video because, of course, the big news right now in the world of Star Trek Adventures is 2nd edition. It's coming out soon. In fact, the book is already up for pre-order, the core book. Not only that, but a lot of people have missed that the Gamemaster Toolkit is also up for pre-order as well, and there's been a number of people on social media that have had to make two separate pre-order purchases because they didn't notice the toolkit was also available. So if you haven't already pre-ordered, the links are going to be down below. You can get either the rulebook or the toolkit, or pre-order them both at the same time, so you don't have to pay shipping twice. So how about that? So anyhow, because that is the big topic, I want to go over the recently released Quickstart Guide, which is similar to all role-playing game Quickstart Guides. It's the rules you need to play the included adventure in there, so it's not going to be the complete set of 2nd edition rules. But I thought, let me bring on a couple of people who I know Star Trek Adventures very well. We've been playing Next Frontier for 4 years now. But they don't know, I know, really. They don't know anything about the changes to 2nd edition. So instead of me just rattling off a list, and I've already expressed my opinions a few times before, I want to get the honest reactions of some players, longtime players, who don't know what these changes are coming up and how you feel. Do you think it's an improvement, or do you prefer the 1st edition in one way or another? So would you two be able to help me with that?
Maybe, if I remember the rules from the first one.
Sounds like fun.
We got a strong maybe from David. Sounds like fun, and it might be good for anyone from the Star Trek Adventures team. Modiphius, Jim Johnson, I know he watches the channel, thank God. That makes 3 people, so it might be good feedback to see live somebody getting the reaction, and we'll see how it goes. Just no violent swearing. It's still, we try to keep it PG here. Okay, there we go. All right, so before I get into the rules real quick, going into the Quick Start Guide, it has an included adventure. Again, the rules that are introduced of how to play 2nd edition are the rules necessary to play the adventure, which is called the Celestial Algorithm. As people who watch the channel know, I do not run pre-made adventures. Usually, probably 99% of the time, I will not run a pre-made adventure, and I'm not going to review this in detail because that would just spoil it for anyone who does want to run it or is going to be a player in it. But what I will say about the adventure, I believe it was written by Fred Love, and that would be a name familiar to a lot of people if you like a lot of the adventures written for STA. But Celestial Algorithm, after reading the rules and reading the adventure, I think it's a great introduction for both new and old players coming into 2nd edition, because Fred, I believe, I hope that's who wrote it, because that's who I'm talking about now. If he's the one who actually wrote it, he has a very good way of setting up the story where it will highlight every single character in that game. So no matter who you're playing as, you'll pick from the pre-gen characters. It's designed for the pre-gens, but of course you could run it with your own original created characters. But of course it's designed with the pre-gens because it's a new thing. It's designed to highlight every single one of the characters, whoever you are playing as, whatever department, their role on the starship, which will give you some insight to how that role is played and how the characters are played. But it's really smartly designed to emphasize the necessary rules and introduce it organically throughout the adventure. So if you are completely brand new to Star Trek Adventures, especially 2nd edition, there's no reason to not play the Celestial Algorithm, because it honestly is a great introduction, and there's advice sprinkled throughout for new GMs as well that will explain how to do things like complications and give you suggestions on what those should be for different situations. So honestly, great job done by who may or may not be Fred. Okay? I should have looked it up before I hit record, but of course I don't do my planning properly. But anyhow, just going to the rules. So the Quickstart, and also in addition Quickstart, there's been a couple of blogs released by Modiphius, which adds more details on rules that are not in the Quickstart. So I'll go over them as well. But the general thing for the both of you and everyone out there who is listening and doesn't know, the core mechanics of 2nd edition are still the same. It's still the 2d20 system. You still have your attribute and your discipline. I think they're actually changing discipline to be department, so it's the same as Starships. So because it's pretty much the same thing anyhow. So instead of changing the terminology slightly when it's the same thing, it's streamlining it, which is kind of the key for 2nd edition. The things you'll see is all about streamlining. It takes the stuff you know, but makes it easier and more efficient. I think it's going to save a lot of time in the mechanical aspect of 2nd edition. So same thing, roll your 2d20s. You can buy up to 3 extra dice, go up to a maximum of 5, just like you know before. Same exact mechanics there. Now, here's the major part where it diverts from 1st edition. There are no more challenge dice in 2nd edition. So when you would roll an attack and you score damage, you roll challenge dice in 1st edition. There's no more challenge dice. When you're doing an extended task or extended consequence, you roll the challenge dice in order to determine how much work, how much stress is inflicted. Those are gone. 2nd edition only uses 20-sided dice from this point forward. There are no other dice in this game. Any knee-jerk reaction so far to that?
Are we just rolling D-sided D20s to generate those resources now, or?
Good question. David, you were going to say something?
Or are they gone?
Same question. How are we rolling for it then?
Well, the thing they do now is everything, let's say attacks, for example, weapons are now going to do static damage. So it's going to be based on whatever the weapon is, and you are going to apply that damage evenly against the target that you're hitting. So if you hit the target, and let's say the phaser does, 4 damage, it's going to do a standard 4 each time. But you could enhance that with momentum spends. So you could add a point or 2 extra to make it more intense. So instead of, the challenge dice, you roll the challenge dice. If an effect came up, it would trigger an effect, which might increase the damage more. Instead of that, you have the opportunity to decide if you're going to increase it yourself, if it has that ability or whatever. So it's the reason being removing that is, of course, like if you see in Star Trek the TV show, if they shoot someone with a phaser and the person gets hit with the phaser, they're pretty much hit. It's stunning them. It very rarely does anything less than that. So the fact that in 1st edition you could hit someone with a phaser and you roll all blanks on your challenge dice sort of makes no sense at all. But of course, those are fringe elements, but it's to remove that whole aspect of you don't know what's going to happen when you shoot someone with a device that if you watch Star Trek, you automatically know what's going to happen when they get hit with it. So that's kind of the reasoning behind it, but again, it's also about streamlining it and to take away the clunkiness of you roll one set of dice, you find out you hit, okay, grab a completely different set of dice, calculate how many you're using, roll that, then start applying momentum and things of how you're going to change and manipulate that. It's going to cut down on the time of anything that uses challenge dice, which could be attacks, which could be the extended tasks, and so on. What do you think, gentlemen? David looks a little upset.
I don't know. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, obviously, if you watch Star Trek, you get hit, you're stunned, or you're potentially dead, depending on the gun. But yeah, if you get hit with a phase, that you're stunned. So it makes sense doing flat damage or flat stun. But then again, it depends on resistance and whatnot. But I think with the challenge dice, the opportunity for not only for it to go well, but for it to go wrong as well, kind of adds that extra little flavor to it, shall we say.
Yeah.
Like, it's really unlikely you're going to do 0 damage, but there are times when you can get hit in the hand or just adds that little less control over it. I kind of feel it's missing that little bit of flavor.
Okay. Anything to add to that, Chris?
Yeah, I think, I mean, maybe it's just re-saying what David said in slightly different words, but it feels like it's leaning, we're gaining in the side, like looking at the game as a Star Trek episode simulator, but we're losing from the, this is a tabletop RP game, because there's less randomness. It becomes more predictable. And I don't know. I think RP, it's always about finding a balance in RP between it being a game and it being a role play, something that you're talking through. And the dice are the main way to interact with it instead of it just being us telling stories to each other. And so the more dice you take away, the more storytelling it becomes, as opposed to a game.
Yeah.
Not to say that either one is good or bad. I'm just saying that's kind of how it's shifting the balance of the game.
It's interesting you say that, because there's other things that went through the rules that in the end I thought that second edition was becoming more gamified than first edition. But of course, the removal of challenge dice is a huge point right now that a lot of people are talking about online. As you can see, there's a lot of people who love their challenge dice and also just the random elements that it adds. But continuing on slightly, one different thing is now, like, normally with the first edition challenge dice, you roll, let's say it's an attack, you roll challenge dice minus resistance, you score 4 or 5 points of damage, you get an injury. That's usually the stun that takes the person out of the round temporarily unless they recover. And that same thing here, you get hit with this weapon, you get hit, you don't really even consider, according to what I read, you don't really consider like how much damage it does. If you roll, you get hit, you're automatically out as if you're hit and you're stunned. So what the damage does instead is now you can spend your stress to soak up that damage so you're not taken out. So it's kind of like an extra way to keep preventing you from being taken out by getting hit multiple times. I already had a little bit of an issue there, but Chris, you were talking about your feelings on the use of stress, right?
Yes. So my main question is, how, on the average enemy, how are we guaranteed knocking them out at this point? Or, I mean, I assume that stronger enemies will have more stress, but if we can essentially, when we make this take a shot, know that if I hit, because the randomness comes from hitting still, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I hit, then it will take them out in one shot or two shots. And so the overall mechanic is I make shots. There's a percentage chance that I hit and do nothing, or not that I hit, just that I do nothing overall, that I hit them and do some damage, but not enough to completely incapacitate them, or that I completely incapacitate them. And in the first edition rule set, there is a much higher variance because there's two sets of rolls. And whereas in this new one, presumably there's a much lower amount of variance. So at the end of the day, regardless of what the systems look like from a top-down view, we're really just talking about what is the chance that I succeed normally, succeed greatly, or completely fail.
Well,
it seems like the gradient is much more stark. Yeah, it seems like the gradient is much more stark. It's more of a black and white instead of a bunch of middle ground.
I think yes, in some aspects, because one of the changes now is that I believe minor NPCs, minor minions, whatever they are, they would be taken out with a single hit, like you would see the cannon fodder on TV being taken out. But then your major and your notable NPCs, the bigger ones, they have the stress rating, and also, I believe the strongest ones, they have their own separate threat pool that is in addition to the GM's threat pool. So they can use their threat pool for their own roles and also to try to avoid injury and stuff like that. So for the weaker enemies, for like the run-of-the-mill enemies that you have, it's a lot easier for you to take them out. You don't have to worry about flopping on those hits that you might do. But when you're going up against like a named opponent, let's say like Commander Sela from the Romulans, or you're going against like Duras from the Klingons, and that, you know, he's a bigger threat. He is a more dangerous enemy. So you're going to actually be in a more serious fight with him. And the fact that these enemies have their own threat pool means that even if the GM burns through all the threat, these enemies come out with a way to defend themselves to make sure that the fight is a little more interesting. How you feel about that?
It's a little scary.
It's a little scary. A little scary.
I think the other thing that I find interesting is that there's two. So like the outcomes are on a spectrum, right? With the worst being you essentially fail every single hit and absolutely nothing happens. And the best being maximum damage. You succeed on everything every time. And in first edition, you have one set of rolls, and in second edition, you have two sets of rolls. And by having, the other way around, you have two sets of rolls in first edition. And by having two sets of rolls, that means that there's more chances to have a failure or a pure failure and less chances to have a pure success. Whereas in the second edition, if you hit with everything, then you've done maximum damage. Whereas in first edition, if you hit with everything, then you've got to do it a second time.
Yeah. You've
got to succeed again with the dice, all dice again. So it's much, much lower chance of maximum output. Whereas there's a higher chance of at least getting some failures, if not all failures. So overall, it's going to, whoever is making the rolls, whoever's trying to attempt to do the action is going to have a better chance of getting maximum success and a lower chance of getting maximum failure.
Anything else, David? You've been nodding along with that. I just want to make sure I don't cut you off.
No, yeah, it's good points that he's made. And yeah, I think, the thought of certain enemies having their own threat pool on top of your threat pool is scary in and of itself. But yeah, I guess it makes sense, and it does streamline it in a sense, and it does make sense that, an NPC, they're all NPCs, but the cannon fodder, one shot gone, that's very Star Trek, and that does make sense, rather than us, the elite train, taking the shot, we hit, but we somehow skip the shoulder, and we're just like, oh, okay, I'll try on my next round. But I think I am going to miss the thought of, even if it is a big bad, like if you get that really good challenge dice roll, that it has that effect where instead of just I shot him once, it's going to take 4 shots at least to take him out fully. You can just do that shot and it just changes the story because you've done an impressive challenge dice roll. That little aspect's gone, which I'm a little sad about, but
Well,
it
we
adds
don't, we
in one
don't
area
know
and
that
takes
that's gone for sure, but it looks
Oh.
like it would be harder if they come prepared with their own threat. They bring their threat to the party. It
Yeah.
could be harder to get that lucky shot in. Yeah, at least in
which
the
And I
is
think
very
those are
sad.
those are I think very important to tabletop RPs
Mhm.
because I mean I think for many players it's common if you think about the most memorable moments and not just this game but any TTRP, it usually involves the maximum good roll that's unlikely or the maximum bad roll that's
Mhm.
unlikely, and both are extremely memorable. So adjusting how often those happen, I think will have maybe not directly noticeable, but they'll have noticeable effects on the game.
Definitely. I think you're going, especially, not that we know, because we don't really fight that much, but I think if you get into combat frequently in your games, it'll probably be very clear when you try the 2 editions, which is more, I don't know if deadly is the right word, or which is more impactful when you're making these attacks.
Mm.
Again, I don't know if we would notice. Very, very few moments of combat in our games. But having that there, yeah, I wonder what's going to be like having that constantly fixed. Again, you can modify with momentum and things like that, but constantly fixed damage, and they arrive with their own way of mitigating it. I guess it remains to be seen exactly how different it would be in second edition, first edition, but you can notice, you can tell right away that that difference is there right away. So we'll figure out about that. Switching things up a little bit, because a lot of the other things it talks about in the quick start guide, it's all just very minor, very little things about how the rules are different in these aspects, like how do you recover stress. Stress recovery, for example, is mainly done through momentum spends and resting. So if you need the stress back right away, you could spend momentum to regain points of it. But otherwise, you're going to have to go and actually rest, depending on the severity of the injury that you get. You'll either need a short rest, a medium rest, or a long rest, or you need a good night's sleep, or you need to go sick bay, and then you could have the treatment to recover it back. But in the moment, it's not going to be coming back until you get it taken care of. But you can, again, use momentum to buy it off. So it sounds like from these rules that with the challenge dice gone, there's a lot of built-in aspects that the challenge dice used to provide, but then that's enhanced with momentum in second edition rather than rolling effects. So you get to choose when you're triggering it, you get to choose when you want it or how you want it to happen, rather than relying more on chance.
Do we know if momentum will still be used for things like gaining extra information
Yes.
after doing checks?
Yes.
I ask because it sounds like momentum is gaining more. It has more ability to do things outside of that. It's much stronger in combat, which means that gaining information will be more of a choice that you have to think about. I feel like it just makes momentum more valuable in more places, making it in general a more difficult to spend.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Resource.
I see David looking like you want to say something, so I just
it was that last point that Chris made about it being more difficult to spend, because like in our games there are times we're getting better at using momentum now, but there's times where like, do I really want to waste some momentum on this? Do I really want to use the momentum to try and find this out or do a little extra? I'll risk the dice roll sort of thing. But with how momentum's these additional uses for momentum, like, I don't know about you, Chris, but personally, I don't, unless I'm about to die, I really doubt I'm going to try and use momentum to recover stress, because I'm going to need it when I make the shot that hits to actually try and get rid of the enemy. Or if we're in a difficult situation, it's one of those, I have to use stress to not get knocked out and ruin the scene, but then the next roll, I've got no momentum left to use, and the roll dies anyway. So is momentum still capped at, what is it, 6 or 7?
Still at 6, yeah.
That's unfortunate.
But you can always just buy your dice with threat. You don't have.
You've got too much threat as it
You
is.
don't need.
Especially now that the enemy has threat as well. What the hell is this?
That's not my threat. That's their threat. I can't say what they're doing with that. So you always have that option. So, and remember, momentum, I believe, same as first edition, it's still going to, you lose 1 per scene change. So it still encourages you to use it while you have it. And of course, the more you use it, especially if you're buying dice, the better chance you have of it coming back. So I keep trying to say that, but...
Does that mean that when an enemy rolls and generates threat, then they're personally having it and it doesn't go into your Gamemaster pool?
That's a good question. I'm not sure about that one. So I don't know if... I think what it would be in that situation, I'm just guessing, is that they show up with their own personal pool of threat that they will go through before they have to use like the GM's pool. So probably anything that they're generating would go into the pool as normal, but they would probably spend their lot first. And then, of course, whatever's out there, because it wouldn't make sense for them to spend the general pool if they have their own. So I would imagine whatever they have there is theirs to use, and anything extra generated just goes to the common pool that they could take from if they need it.
Because I'm wondering, because like currently if they generate threat from a roll, it goes into a common pool.
Yeah.
And which means that if the players fight a group of enemies and it's an average fight, but the enemies generate a bunch of threat during the fight and then are taken out immediately, then that threat is all building towards some larger thing that can happen to us. So I mean, as a player, I'd rather their threat be gone when they're gone. And
well, I think whatever
general
pool,
threat,
I think whatever pool they show up with, that will be gone if they're gone. But anything they generate would be just normal, as if an enemy was generating it in first edition anyhow. So that extra threat they bring in, I don't think that stays behind if they're dead. That's just always separate. From what I read. So yeah, that doesn't, it's not they jump up and there's 10 more threat and they're like, oh, I'm dead. And then it's like, oh, he's got 10 threat now. So I think that goes away. But then standard first edition rules, like anything that they generate extra, just constantly going into the main pool anyhow. My guess, I don't have the details on it. As I said, the pre-order for the core rulebook is out, but the PDF is not ready yet. So even if you pre-order, you don't have access to the full rules just yet. But one thing we were talking about just now that reminded me of another change here is there is a change on one of the determination uses. Probably the most common determination use. It sounds like determination use with the values and that, how you call upon values, spend your determination, you could do a crazy thing. I think most of that is retained. However, the most common one where you would buy an extra die, you would use that to buy the first extra die. And that automatically rolls a 1, so you get like 2 successes right away. I believe it's perfect opportunity is the term for it. I don't remember exactly. That's being tweaked slightly. The way it is being done now is you buy all the extra dice you are going to buy first, regularly with momentum or threat. Then you can spend determination, and if you use it for that perfect opportunity, you change one of those dice in your pool to a 1. So what that's going to do, 2 things what it would do is, first, it's going to alleviate the confusion that a lot of players have about buying dice. There's been a lot of people making mistakes where they don't know how these free dice from determination and some other talents come into play, and they're paying wrong costs for the additional dice they're getting. So it's streamlining that in where you're just buying dice from the same mechanic the whole time, and now determination makes your pool stronger. However, I think what it's going to do is... Well, let me save my thoughts, my downside thought, until I hear your opinion on it.
Let you go first, Chris.
Any opinion you have, or if not, I'll share what my downside was for it.
I mean, it's not much, but it's again costing the player more.
Yeah.
Because it's at least one more threat or that's generated or one more momentum spent.
Yep.
And with momentum becoming more precious as well.
Yeah.
It's that one extra just to get, and then we can do the win. The roll the one. Which, because we can only do it once a session anyway, making it cost more seems a bit mean. I'll say.
Yeah, but if that's done on an attack, as we were just talking about, then that automatic hit is done. There's no more rolling. You don't have to succeed again with the challenge dice. So it's stronger because of the change to challenge dice.
Very true.
Yeah, when it comes to combat, that's a good point. Just don't want to spend more momentum.
Yeah, I know you're scared of momentum. But yeah, I think my downside is I agree with you, David, that if, let's say you don't want to buy extra dice and you use your determination, yeah, you still get those 2 successes, but now you're only rolling 1 die. Unlike first edition, you don't want to buy extra dice, you use determination, that gets that first extra die for you, and you're still rolling 2 more dice. So you have a bigger chance of getting momentum or more successes on just a standard 2d20 roll compared to how it is now. Again, it makes it easier to follow, easier to flow, but if you're not buying extra dice anyhow, it kind of limits the number of successes you are going to roll.
Yeah, because if it's a difficult roll, we only ever use that determination when we know it's something difficult, like it's a 5 difficulty roll. Then we'll try and use our determination. But rather than having that, we've got the 2 already, we just need 3 more. Maybe we'll just buy 1 more dice. You're gonna have to buy the extra every time. Because I'm not rolling. Yeah, 2 successes. Exactly. Yeah, 2 successes, nice. But if I need 3. I'm not rolling 1 more dice in them. Well, me especially. I'm not rolling 1 dice in the hopes that I get a 1, because I'll get a red 0.
yeah.
And then determination's wasted, like last game.
Red 0, for those of you who don't play on Roll20, that signifies a complication being rolled. So yeah. But if I could put a counter out there of another benefit I see because of this, I know you're worried about the spending of momentum, and yeah, it looks like momentum is going to be used a lot more. It is a lot more valuable in this game, that there's a lot more things you have to spend it on, and you might be losing it a bit more because you're using it a bit more. But as a counter to that, one benefit that I really see from it is there are still a lot of groups out there, just like our group was in the early days, who are terrified for no reason, for no good reason, most of them, are terrified of generating threat. So if you have these difficult rules that you're talking about, but you don't have the momentum to buy those extra dice, and you still want the determination to get those extra points, but that's not getting you that extra die anymore, like you said, you need to buy more dice to increase your chance of getting it. That is going to kind of shoehorn people into generating threat in a lot of situations where they probably would not otherwise, because they would just go through their momentum first. Because I remember our group, it took so long to convince you all that threat is not going to kill you. Okay, I did kill you all once, but that was for story purposes. Threat is not going to kill you. It's going to enhance the story. It's going to enhance the drama and make a challenge a little more dramatic, you know? So there's still a lot of groups that are scared of that. So for me, from a game master perspective, I like that it's limiting that option in that situation. While I do recognize it limits it, I like that because I think that's going to encourage players to use threat more, because they need to save momentum for other things, and hopefully will open their eyes to see threat is not something used to just punish you. There's a purpose behind it. That's my soapbox there.
It's a very good counterpoint, I have to admit, because if you've got a nice DM who doesn't make sandworms appear in space every
it's
now
not
and
a sandworm, it's a planet killer. It's not a sandworm.
Potato. Anyway, it is story. So yeah, threat nowadays, in particular our games, is a lot less scary to use. I'm guessing one of the, like you mentioned before, momentum being used to relieve stress. I'm guessing in those sorts of situations we can't use threat as
I'm not sure if that's listed as an immediate spend. If it's an immediate spend, then yes, you would be able to use it. I'm not sure. I don't know if I noticed or if I wrote it down in the notes, if that is or not. Yeah, I didn't write if it's immediate or not. If it is, yeah, you could generate threat to do that. But yeah, that's a good point to have. Now, if there's no other comment, let me get into some things that I think you all will really enjoy, if I may. So going to the character sheet. Now the characters, again, the stats are pretty much the same. You're going to calculate stress a bit differently because now it has a different purpose in the game. But here's a couple things that I think I really like. First of all, everyone's gaining a new trait that's going to represent their type of character. Like Klingon might have warrior, or you might just have like officer or something like that. So everyone's going to have an additional trait. From what I'm reading, traits have a much larger role or a larger emphasis in second edition that they were supposed to have in first edition, but maybe not highlighted quite as well. That's one point. The next thing is every single species is going to come with its own species ability. So it's like you're gaining an extra talent that is only for your species. They're all going to be unique, or at least representative of those species. There were a lot in first edition where there might be a talent that says if you play this species, you must take this talent, and that ate up a slot of your talents. I believe those ones are being turned into the species base ability or talent, whatever you want to call it. And then the rest of the talents you have, you're free to choose from whatever you're eligible for. And the last really good thing about characters is all characters are getting one additional focus slot compared to the 6 that you started. And the additional one is for something not related to work. So it's for a hobby or a pastime or something like that. So you can spend the 6 that you choose to be something to narrow down your skills as an officer or whatever your character is. But then you get that bonus pastime one. So you have something that you might never get to use in a role, but you have it there to highlight who your character is and maybe potentially use it as in a side story somehow. So what do you think of that?
I like the hobby. Go on, I keep talking. You first.
I like the idea of your essentially your hobby or pastime of some sort being able to directly come in and affect other parts of the game or other parts of your life. I mean, I assume that having painting as your additional focus is not going to come up because you're making a roll that has to do with you painting a picture, or like in a free time scene. It's going to come up because you're investigating a ruins and you find a painting. You find a painting and you're able to interpret it better or something like that. And that I really like that.
David, you were going to say?
Yeah, I was wondering about how much it would actually come into play, but that's a very good point. But yeah, I was more just there was a few things in that I think it's more directed at, that'd be more useful for more experienced players. But a new starter, and I'm speaking from remembering when I tried to make Frank Drake, that I would choose a species where the trait, like if I'm being security, I would choose a species where the trait somehow affects the security aspect of it. Same with the focus, because whatever, I doubt it'd be a Klingon, but for example, my Klingon really likes combat sports. Therefore, I can use that in fighting. But with an experienced player, like Chris mentioned, like having painting and being able to use it in a different role would be a really good way of doing it. So I think it actually, for new players, it might be probably going to be quite a few poor choices, but it'll also be a good way of trying to get them into thinking a bit more. Because, like you said, if you just randomly chose painting, you could then, even a new player, be like, oh, you know what? I could actually try and use my painting thing here, couldn't I? And try and use it for this scenario. So I think it's got its two sides to the coin, but I think it'll help draw new players out, but I think some new players are going to make some poor choices at the beginning. Or shoehorn themselves.
I think new players tend to make poor choices regardless, so it'll be a learning experience. It'll be a learning experience for everyone. But yeah, fair points. Yeah, fair points that you made. I think Starships are kind of similar. They said that the stats and how they are calculated aren't going to change very much from first edition, and most of the ships still have the same stats that appeared in Utopia Planitia. So the majority of that will not change. I think resistance is going to be calculated differently because, again, of the static damage that's being dealt against the shields. I believe Starships are getting, also depending on their mission profile, they get a boost to one of their stats somewhere. So that's going to be an additional thing depending on what your Starship is assigned to do. It's going to change the stats a little bit for that. However, one of the big things about Starships that is changing, pretty massive thing that's changing, is power. Starship power. In first edition, there was a whole set of power. We never really got into the nitty gritty in our games. And again, I think a lot of it is because we don't get into Starship combat all that often. But also in combat in first edition, you could do an attack and you could spend some of your power to try and make the attack stronger, or you could do another thing and spend some of the power to make it do this. Some of the actions you do, like firing phasers in general, cost you power automatically, and you're constantly having to track the power of your Starship in combat for the most part. Now, second edition is kind of doing away with that completely, almost entirely. They're now having a system called reserve power, where you either have it or you don't. So it's sort of like a Starship's determination, where you can use reserve power on a roll for something, and it acts as like a double success on that roll. But you've expended that reserve power. So it would be up to the engineer to do some finagling to earn it back, similar to how you could try to do something to get your determination back. So it kind of, again, streamlines what power does. It takes away the bookkeeping, so you don't have to worry, like, does this cost power? How much does it cost? If I spend one, what does that do? Now everything is kind of even. You spend the power if you want on this roll, and you are going to get a double success if you roll whatever. But also, I believe it also increases the chance of getting a complication because again, you're straining the engines or you're straining the power reserve so you can blow out something. So it's making that aspect a bit easier. So you don't really have to think about all the details of power. I know we never really had to deal with it that much in a combat sense, but do you have any opinions on that?
I mean, like you mentioned, you were talking about all the power, and I just opened the shit character sheet. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a thing. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I do
having
remember
something
using
simple.
it. I do remember using it and discussing it in some of our larger fights. It also helps when we have when we had more players that were directly involved in the fights.
Yeah.
So like when we had a pilot playing and an engineer and security all at the same time, so that they're really having to share that resource. Which I found interesting role-playing dynamic. So now I mean, instead of distributing the resource, it's more so just who gets to use it once.
Once, but again, the engineer can get it back too. So it'll give something for the engineer to do in the combat, which, again, we haven't seen it much in our game. What's that?
Before stuff breaks.
Before stuff breaks, yeah. A lot of people online, and again, we really haven't seen that in our games, but a lot of people online complain that the engineer has nothing to do during combat, which for our games, to me, that was shocking, because I feel like our engineer always has something to do and is one of the most active ones. But apparently it's pretty big out there that one of the biggest complaints is engineer has nothing to do. So I think now if there's this reserve power thing, that might help, because everyone's going to want it for that, and so they're going to need to keep getting it back. So the engineer is going to have to come up with new ways of getting that power rerouted back into the different systems. But like, you can only use it once in a go around, so it's kind of like a negotiating of who needs the power first.
I feel like the reason why our engineers were probably always busy is because most of the time we were in combat, there was always some other secondary objective going on that the engineers were trying to complete an extended task in order to build this thingamabob that's going to let us do the other thing that's not blowing up the enemy.
Yeah. And again, nothing to do with second edition, nothing to do with first edition rules, but you should always try to have something for every character to do when you're in a situation, not just like wait for it to break and then you can act. So so that's kind of the goal. But I think in those situations where it's like a spontaneous, or maybe it's just rolling random encounters, as some people do, you don't have things planned out, you don't have any secondary objectives, and the engineer's sitting there like, can I help? So I think some little aspect where it's like there is this coveted resource, but only one person can use it in a round before it can come back again. Kind of make sure that they're always on their toes and they're trying their hardest to keep it going. I think there's also going to be some abilities or maybe some attacks that the ships have that they can't use unless there is reserve power available. So it's like, okay, we want to use it for this role, but if we do that, we're not going to be able to initiate this system as well. So it's deciding where that power gets distributed. So it's, to me, I really don't know, because I never really felt like our engineer was struggling to do things. But at the same time, I've been so swamped in my brain about how to do power that it always confuses the heck out of me. So I think I'm going to be happy with this change personally.
And it's a really easy, this seems like a change that doesn't have as much of a far-reaching effect, like cascade effect, to changing other rules in the same way that removing challenge dice does.
Yep.
And because of that, it'll be easier to just like slot in and out that rule. If you really like the older system with power, you can probably keep it without it affecting too much. Whereas I imagine if you really like challenge dice, it's going to be hard to keep them.
Yeah.
and still play the rest of the second edition rules, because I imagine a lot of rules or stats are changing to accommodate the change in challenge dice.
Talents are all changing to any talent that used challenge dice has been rewritten to continue their effect, but without having challenge dice. So in those situations, it's...
Well, like I mentioned, determination might have been slightly affected by challenge dice being removed. Like the change that happened to determination might have been helping to balance the change to challenge dice. So there's just more cascading effects and more smaller balance tweaks that we might not see not being the designers. And so it's more difficult to substitute the old rules in or keep the old rules. Whereas, this change to power, you can probably just drop it in if you really keep the old
this
power.
Definitely
if you
sounds
really liked it.
Yeah, this sounds very modular. The designers do say that really you can play any rules that you want. Like if you like this aspect, there's no reason for you to change it. If you like this part of 2E, you could change it to that. So they're trying to be as open as possible. At least what they're saying so far, that just play the aspects of either edition that you like. So like you said, I think especially for power, that's something that you could easily keep for Starships. And even in the recent Federation Klingon War tactical campaign, there's a whole new way of using power, like an alternative power use rule set that came out for that. So now you have 3 power options that you could do if you so desired. So I think those are basically the majority, or I would say the biggest changes. Like I said, the massive one is the challenge dice are gone. So things like combat extended task 2, they now have breakthroughs. You don't have to worry about rolling 5 hits because that doesn't exist anymore. You're doing a standard for the most part. So the breakthroughs are in fixed intervals throughout that work track now. So all the things with challenge dice have been revamped. Any talent, any ability that use challenge dice is being redone to reflect that there are no challenge dice here. But the things outside of that, they're not that massive. It's a heavier focus on using momentum. And like I said, hopefully that also encourages a heavier use of threat, or generating threat, I should say, from the players. But aside from that, I think the tweaks to the character sheet is good because the stats are still going to be pretty much 100% identical. You're just getting more gamified abilities that you could apply as your character. Starships need a little bit more tweaking because of their system, but apparently Starship combat is going to be heavily streamlined compared to first edition, so I'm waiting to read those rules. But aside from that, I don't see massive changes, and I don't really see a jump in difficulty here. I just think it's going to be a little, if we were to switch to second edition, a little getting used to not having challenge dice be part of our lives in what we're doing. Do you have any final thoughts, reflections on these changes to the game?
I think it'll be fun to try it out for a few sessions and see if there's a notable difference. I mean, I'm certainly not like completely committed to the old rules. I'm happy to try the new ones. But if they don't work out, then I mean, it's the great thing about tabletop RPs. You can just play them however is most fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree on that as well. The streamlining aspect of it, I think, is a good idea because with Star Trek Adventures as well, the role-playing aspect of it is really important. So less things to worry about, less things that you need to think, power, how much do we have, all that stuff. I think that makes it a lot more open for your characters to, roughly what's going to happen so you can kind of prepare. Because there's times in our videos where we roll some challenge dice and it's an incredible thing. You're like, yeah, so tell me what happens. And you're sat there going, what happened that made that happen? And a bit more consistent means you can get into the flow of things a bit easily. We're going to miss the fun moments though.
Yeah.
But I think still personally, I'm going to miss the challenge dice. But I like the power being optional sort of thing.
Mhm.
I quite like that one as well, to be honest.
Me too, definitely.
Yeah, like I said before, there's a lot of levers to pull for balance to make sure
Yeah.
that at the end of the day, when you attempt to do something, there's a certain percent chance you succeed, certain percent chance you fail, and some spectrum of in between. And if they pull the levers all right, then and adjust everything and tinkered with it enough, then it shouldn't matter whether you have challenge dice or not.
Yeah.
If you just want those success and failure rates to be correct, so to say.
Right.
Because you need failures to happen. The game's boring if you always succeed.
Definitely, yeah.
And see, it's a matter of, one, making sure there's the correct amount of failures, and two, making sure that it's fun to fail, so to say.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm slightly worried with the extended task not having the challenge dice, just because I worry that it's too much of it's just a matter of time until I succeed.
Yeah.
Because we had multiple times where someone was doing an extended task and they got really unlucky with their first 2 set of challenge dice and got no progression whatsoever.
Yeah.
And at that point, they just give up and say, okay, I'm going to try something else.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to make a different approach. And I feel like that's not going to happen. That situation would not come up as much.
It's going to definitely remain to be seen until we get those full rules to see how it's affected. Like, again, since challenge dice are gone and it looks like momentum and possibly threat are replacing it, it's going to be interesting to see how they try to balance out those situations so that threat is still there, that you can fail an extended task even if you're really, really strong with your base stats. I'm curious about that part. But David, were you going to say something else?
No, I was just thinking about all the things and the very scary big bad bosses of the extra threat.
Don't worry about the boss and don't worry about the threat. The last thing I was going to say is that when I read first edition, there were a number of things in first edition, including momentum and threat was the big one, that just reading it and hearing about it, I didn't think it was going to be good. I thought, like, I see what they're going for, but I don't like this personally, from where I'm coming from. But I want to try the game, so we ran the game. I want to try it exactly as they designed it. I want to see what it was like, and then I would tweak it as need be. And I'm glad I did, because then I learned, like, oh, this is why they use it this way. This is why they have it. And I really love the system as it was in first edition. Same with second edition. There's a lot of things I'm reading here that, like, I like the sound of that, but this one I'm not so sure of. It's not convincing me that that's the right way to go, and I don't know if I want to use it. But like Chris said, I think we have to try it. I think we have to play a few sessions with all of the second edition rules and get a feel of, like, if we can see it, like, oh, that's why they put that in. That's why they changed that. And maybe then they'll change the perspective. But as they said, if there's anything you don't like about one edition or the other, play the version that you do like in your games. So I think it'll be worth trying. And I hope the rest of the party is willing to get into it and explore and share their thoughts too. But I want to thank the both of you. Thank you, David. Thank you, Chris, for coming here and giving your literal first impressions upon hearing some of the rules change. And I apologize to Modiphius if I explained any of these things poorly and they're like, no, Bill, that is not how it is. Please stop talking right now. But I think I got the gist of it. Before we go, Chris, I know you've been doing a lot of interesting things on social media. Would you like to just share that with the audience real quick for anyone that's interested?
Yeah, I've just been, you might have noticed in my background, my other hobby besides playing games is painting up miniatures for them too. And so I share that on my Instagram, and I think Bill will put a link to that in the description below.
Can do. That'll be there. Beautiful work too. So I love seeing that. And yeah, you just astound me with all the different skills you've been picking up over the years. So keep that up.
I really hope to paint the our ship, the Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh,
If the ship
yeah.
I ordered the 3D printed ship I ordered ever arrives.
Right.
I mean,
Is yours on
ordered it-
delay too?
Yeah.
Yeah. I ordered it last November and still nothing.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Not just me. I'm happy.
Yeah. We're all waiting. We're all waiting.
Yeah.
But okay, hopefully it comes in. Hopefully you do get to paint that. I would love to see that. So if that's all, then I think this is time to call it quits. Again, if you want to see more of Chris and David, you could watch our actual play series of Star Trek Next Frontier, and I'm sure they will be back on the channel in the future. I hope to share their thoughts on many, many other things. But until next time, thank you for watching. As always, stay safe out there, my friends. Live long and prosper. Peace and long life. See ya.
Bye.